Are you one of those people who prefers to watch YouTubers summarize horror movies instead of the actual horror movies because you don't want to get jump scared but do want to know the plot? Have you ever wished someone would cover a horror podcast for a change? Well, buddy boy, have I got good news for you. The Magnus Archives is a podcast distributed by Rusty Quill.
And licensed under a Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial Share-alike International License.
Sorry, don't know what came over me there. The Magnus Archives is a horror podcast that gained notoriety on Tumblr during the late 2010s and eventually rose to dominate the audio drama scene. It follows a team of people who work in the archives of the Magnus Institute,
an organization dedicated to academic research into the esoteric and the paranormal.
In a world much like ours where the average civilian wouldn't believe in such things. The main character, Jonathan Sims, doesn't believe in them either, despite his profession. Each episode is framed as a tape recording of him reading someone's report of a supernatural experience and then trying to debunk it with his coworkers, Martin, Tim, and Sasha. At first, each of these cases, or statements as they're referred to in Universe, seem to be self-contained short stories. But, as the series progresses, certain names, locations, and symbols reoccur, hinting at a larger narrative. This video is the first in an event I'm hosting called Magnus Monday Madness, where every Monday this March, I'll be covering a different season of the Magnus Archives, summarizing each episode, and then ranking how scary I found it. 1 star goes to the episodes that actively aren't scary, to a point where I find them downright boring or even silly. 2 stars goes to the episodes that didn't do anything for me, but I can understand why others would find them unnerving. 3 stars are for episodes that give me a fun little shiver. 4 for those that have gone from merely creepy to outright scary, and the grand prize of 5 stars goes to the episodes that I find so horrifying that merely thinking of them upsets me. This system is based on how scary I found each episode, rather than on how much I enjoyed it or perceived its artistic value. But I still wanted a way to signal my favorites, so I added an asterisk next to the titles of my favorite episodes. Just keep in mind that everyone's scared of different things. What I consider a 5-star episode might only be a 2 for you, and vice versa. If you have any particular topics that you'd like to avoid, I put a link in the description to episode-by-episode content warnings. Obviously, my summaries are going to spoil each episode, but I won't discuss any information that the audience themselves wouldn't yet have. I will, however, draw your attention to and keep notes on certain characters, symbols, and forces that reoccur throughout the series, because heaven knows I couldn't keep track of them my first time. Please don't get disheartened if you can't either or if you feel overwhelmed. The first season dumps a lot on you, so I've devised a system to help you prioritize what to keep track of. For characters who are extremely important and a key part of the plot, I've added little doodles of how I imagined them to look to their cards. If there's no doodles, but there is an exclamation mark on the card, that means it would be wise to remember at least the basics about its topic. If the corner is blank, that means don't stress yourself out. This card's topic might get a filler episode or 2 centering around it, but otherwise it only appears as an Easter egg. Keeping tabs on their appearances might enhance the world building or give you bits of foreshadowing, but the main plot is still comprehensible if you don't. You'll also notice that in most of these summaries, a circled symbol or 2 will appear in the corner of the screen. I'm not going to explicitly tell you what any of these mean until the series itself does so, but I included them regardless for viewers to come back to once they do have that context. With that said, let's start summarizing. The series begins by introducing us to our protagonist, Jonathan Sims. He's been hired as the Magnus Institute's new head archivist, as the previous one, Gertrude Robinson, has passed away. He and his assistants, Tim, Martin, and Sasha, are attempting to digitize the archive, recording themselves as they read through and discuss each statement. John wants to disprove all of them, but his co-workers are less dismissive. 1. Anglerfish. A student encounters something he assumes is human in an alley, only to realize it's actually a human-shaped lure attached to something that's definitely not human. John wants to dismiss this as a hallucination, but Sasha realizes that there was a series of disappearances in this area around when this statement was taken, which she believes may be linked to the creature in this statement, which the team dubs the anglerfish. One of the people who went missing is named Sarah Baldwin. A strong start at 4 stars. 2. Do not open. Someone is paid by a stranger to store a locked coffin that he is warned not to open. He successfully resists doing so, even after he hears noises coming from inside of it, and finds himself sleepwalking towards it with the key. The coffin is retrieved from him by 2 large men who work for Brecon and Hope Deliveries. 2 stars. 3. Across the street. A person sees something crawl through her neighbor's window and attack him. She calls the police, who go to the apartment, but there's no one there other than a person she insists looks nothing like her neighbor, but everyone else is convinced is him. Even photos of him have changed to match this new stranger's appearance. The statement giver also spends a lot of time describing this one engraved table that's in his apartment, which I know doesn't feel relevant now, but will be later. 3 stars. 4. Page turner. A person tries to sell an antique book with illustrations that give anyone who looks at them vertigo. This book is said to come from the library of Jürgen Leitner, a now scattered collection of supernatural texts that a man named Gerard Key went missing trying to track down. When Jürgen Leitner is mentioned, John has a noticeably negative reaction. There's also a brief mention of a man named Michael Crew who survived being struck by lightning. 1 star. This episode exists mainly to set up future plot points rather than be scary in the moment. 5. Thrown away. A garbage man notices this one house keeps disposing stranger and stranger trash, starting with a bag of mutilated doll heads, but escalating to decaying teeth and a metal heart engraved with the name of someone who recently disappeared. 3 stars. 6. Squirm. A man hooks up with a woman who doesn't realize she has bugs living under her skin until they start to consume her from the inside out. The woman says she was infected by another with a similar condition, and the archive team suspects this is someone named Jane Prentice, but they don't tell us anything more about her. A solid 4 stars. 7. The Piper. On the Western Front in World War I, soldiers start to hear music that no one else can in the days that lead up to their deaths. 2 stars. 8. Burned out. There used to be a halfway house for troubled teens known as Hilltop Road, but in the 70s it burnt down. The remains of one of its inhabitants, Agnes Montague, were never found, but Martin finds records of an Agnes Montague dying on the same day that construction to build something new on the property began. The man who started the construction kept experiencing supernatural events related to fire while working on the property. 1 star. 9. A Father's Love. A child named Julia Montauk, whose mother disappeared years ago, overhears her father, Robert, arguing with someone named Maxwell Rayner. That night, the lights blow out, but she can't find her father, and something in the dark is hunting her. She calls the police and tries to find her father, only to walk in on him performing a human sacrifice. He swears it's for her protection, and upon completing the ritual, her pursuer vanishes. The police arrive and Robert is arrested, but not before Julia notices that the person Robert murdered wore a symbol that her missing mom used to. While researching this case, the archivists realize the symbol belongs to a cult called the People's Church of the Divine Host, which was led by, you guessed it, one Maxwell Rayner. All 41 of Robert Montauk's victims appear to have been members. 4 stars. 10. Vampire Killer. 2 homeless teens, Trevor and Nigel Herbert, are taken in by a vampire who plans to feed off of them. She attacks Nigel, and while Trevor manages to kill her, he is too late to save his brother. He subsequently dedicates his life to hunting those he thinks are vampires, but in his zeal, fails to realize that some of his victims are genuinely human. Another 4-star episode. 11. Dreamer. A man named Antonio Blake has prophetic dreams that warn him of people's upcoming deaths. His statement ends with him directly addressing Gertrude Robinson, John's deceased predecessor, and warning her that she is soon going to die in the archives. John tries to brush this off as a prank from his co-workers, but the head of the Magnus Institute, Elias Bouchard, confirms that she did indeed die here, and under mysterious circumstances at that. 2 stars. 12. First aid. A hospital receives 2 burn victims, one of whom is Gerard Key, that guy who hunts down books from the supernatural library. When the other victim regains consciousness, they try to perform a ritual that mentions something called the Lightless Flame. Gerard murders them before they can complete it, and their body immediately turns to ash. 1 star. 13. Alone. This is the series' first statement to be recorded live from the person who experienced it, rather than read from a transcript. A woman comes to the Institute and gives a statement to John about how she was kicked out of her fiancé's funeral by his biological relatives, the Lucases, who told her she wasn't really family. As she wandered from the funeral, lost in her grief, the fog started to drag her towards an open grave, but her fiancé's ghost intervenes and saves her. Ever the skeptic, John tells her she should talk to a psychiatrist and not a research institute. What an ass. 2 stars. 14. Piecemeal. A person arranges for a curse to be placed on a man who wronged him, and begins receiving the man's severed body parts in the mail. Catch is, whenever he receives one of these parts, an accident will occur shortly after, causing him to lose his corresponding one. 3 stars. 15. Lost John's Cave. A pair of sisters go cave diving, but the tunnels start shifting and separating them. One of them makes it out and claims not to know what happened to her sister, but when Tim acquires the camera she took on her trip, while the footage is all black, he can hear her chanting, "Take her, not me." 4 frickin' stars. 16. Arachnophobia. A guy who's afraid of spiders is convinced that this spider he accidentally crushed as a child keeps coming back from the dead to follow him, no matter how many times he kills it. Look, I'm sorry to all the arachnophobes out there, but I find this episode hilarious, even if it does end with the team discovering said man died choking on a spider web. 1 star. 17. The Boneturner's Tale. Martin is out sick, and when Elias gets wind of how John treated the grieving woman from episode 13, he goes to yell at him, as the Lucases are patrons of the Institute. Once he's gone, John gets back to a statement about another book from the library of Jürgen Leitner, which taught a man named Jared Hopworth how to alter his physical form in exchange for sacrifices of bone, which he harvests from rats. The book was previously owned by a man named Michael Crew, who appeared in the last Leitner episode as well. 2 stars. 18. The Man Upstairs. A person starts hearing strange noises from the apartment above him, and after stains damage his ceiling, he goes up to investigate for himself, only to find meat nailed to every surface of the apartment, along with the owner's rotting body. Gross! I love it! 3 stars. 19. Confession, and 20. Desecrated Host. This is the first statement we get that's split into multiple episodes, and Martin doesn't get to be in either of them since he's still out sick. In this statement, a priest is possessed by a force he's been hired to exorcise. This causes him to experience a slew of supernatural events that culminate in him munching on some wafers only to realize he was actually cannibalizing someone. Confession is only a 2-star episode, but that cannibalism plot twist in Desecrated Host gets 3. 21. Freefall. A skydiving instructor is hired to help an 85-year-old named Simon Fairchild do a dive, but when they jump from the plane, everything around him disappears, and he ends up falling through a vast blue void for a full 15 minutes. 1 star. Oh hey look, it's Martin! What's up buddy, how you been? 22. Colony. Martin's been awful! All that researching supernatural entities has finally culminated in a member of the team meeting one of them. Remember that woman Jane Prentice who had bugs under her skin that got spread to others? Well, these past few days, she's been targeting Martin. She stole Martin's phone and used it to tell his coworkers that he was out sick, when in actuality, he was hiding from her with no way to reach the outside world. The Institute sets up a worm-proof room for Martin to stay in until the Prentice situation is handled. 3 stars. 23. Schwartzwald. There's a mausoleum filled with creepy eye imagery. I find this episode boring. 1 star. 24. Strange music. A woman inherits a calliope and a box of dolls from her grandfather. Strange thing is, the dolls are all missing their lower jaws, and other people say they can hear the calliope's music even when she hasn't touched it. Shortly after breaking up with her boyfriend, these are stolen from her by those guys from Brecon and Hope Deliveries who were carrying around that coffin in episode 2. A few days later, the woman's ex-boyfriend is found dead and missing his lower jaw, just like the dolls. Tim has a hunch that this is somehow linked to a supernatural circus troupe known as the Circus of the Other, and the team realize the items from the story have somehow ended up within the archive's storage unit. 3 stars. 25. Growing Dark. A Christian girl loses her faith following the death of her mom and joins the People's Church of the Divine Host. The girl has since gone missing, but there are hints that she and other members of the cult have since moved to Ny-Ålesund, one of the world's northernmost settlements where there's sometimes no sunlight for weeks at a time. 2 stars. 26. A Distortion. Sasha is approached by someone called Michael, but before you get excited, this isn't Michael Crew who got hit by lightning and is linked to Leitner books. This is Michael Shelley, and while it can appear as human, Sasha gets a glimpse at its true form, a creature with long, twisted limbs known as the Distortion. It says it wants to help her, and leads her to the corpse of one of Jane Prentice's infested victims, where Sasha learns she can kill the worms en masse by spraying them with a fire extinguisher. This one's not that scary, but I do find Michael fun. 2 stars. 27. A Sturdy Lock. A man experiences continual sleep terrors where something is trying to break into his room. 2 stars. 28. Skintight. A ghost hunting YouTuber named Melanie King explores an old military hospital with her team, which disturbs the entities within. One of her co-workers is named Sarah Baldwin, who was declared missing all the way back in episode 1 and is presumably a victim of the anglerfish. In this episode, she addresses the things haunting the hospital directly, but when one of them attacks her, some of her skin is dislodged, and it's revealed she is something inhuman wearing the skin of Sarah Baldwin. 2 stars. 29. Cheating Death. A dying soldier gambles against the Grim Reaper for a second chance at life, but when he cheats to win, the Reaper disintegrates and he is turned into its replacement. Chilling story. 3 stars. 30. Killing Floor. A slaughterhouse worker ends up trapped on a conveyor belt that's headed for a meat grinder. The opening monologue of this episode is phenomenal, and it alone makes Killing Floor our first 5-star episode in terms of horror. However, I want to note that this episode's villain, Tom Han, has been heavily critiqued for perpetuating racist stereotypes, as he's a Chinese immigrant who harvests human meat. Unfortunately, he'll be a reoccurring character, and his entire family is depicted similarly. 31. First Hunt. A group of hunters become the prey of a stranger they run into. I've heard some people say that this episode terrified them, but if you give me a story where a bunch of British guys fly to a foreign country to shoot up the animals there as a way of feeding their fragile masculine egos, I'm gonna root for the killer. That's not scary, that's karma. 1 star. 32. Hive. John finds a statement in the archives from Jane Prentice herself. It reveals she was once an extremely lonely human woman whose house became infested with bugs. Her judgment altered by depression, she allowed them to parasitically infect and live within her, as it made her finally feel useful and connected to others. Ooh, this one is creepy. 4 stars. 33. Boatswain's Call. A sailor is hired by a man named Peter Lucas to work on his cargo ship, the Tundra. While aboard the ship, she realizes that all of the packages are empty. The real cargo is the crew, a portion of whom are abandoned at sea every journey. I like the premise, but the delivery didn't affect me enough to give it more than 2 stars. 34. Anatomy Class. An anatomy professor realizes his students are shapeshifters, who are taking his class so they can perfect their human forms. To be honest, I found the students pretty endearing. However, the descriptions of them dissecting the bodies and then warping their own to match were definitely creepy enough to warrant 3 stars. 35. Old Passages. During the renovation of a basement designed by an architect named Robert Smirk, a series of strange tunnels are discovered and promptly explored by a young Gerard Key, who is looking for more Leitner books. John's research into this incident is interrupted when he spots some of Jane Prentice's worms in the archives. While he tries to handle them, Martin is approached by 2 delivery men with a package he accepts on John's behalf, not realizing that the 2 men are the notorious Breakin and Hope. This episode exists primarily to set up other ones, thus sacrificing the horror and only getting 1 star. 36. Taken ill. The residents of a nursing home become infected with a rash that spreads not just on human skin, but onto inanimate objects as well. 3 stars. 37. Burnt offering. We get to learn what was in that package Breakin and Hope delivered. A lighter with a spiderweb design, and a table that matches the description of the one in the apartment of the neighbor who got replaced in episode 3. This episode's statement centers around a man who tampered with the aftermath of a cult ritual, which results in him becoming cursed so that things spontaneously burst into flames around him. While I wouldn't like it if this happened to me, I don't know, I just really struggled to find this episode scary. 1 star. 38. Lost and Found. After buying a vase from a man named Mikhail Salesa, and yes, this is our 3rd person whose name is some variant of Michael, an antique dealer starts having items from around their house go missing. At one point, they catch a pair of hands extending from the vase and realize there's something inside of it doing the stealing. 1 star, the guy's just a little roommate. Right as the episode is coming to an end, one of the walls in the archives crashes down, revealing millions of Jane Prentice's worms behind it. 39. Infestation. The Institute is flooded with worms, all of which try to burrow into the archivists' bodies. This causes John to finally admit that he believes in the supernatural, and his intense denial was fueled by the fear that acknowledging these powers would make them stronger. The reason he insists his team conduct the audio recordings that the show consists of is so that if any of them were to die or disappear, their successors could get a glimpse at what they'd been like as people, since no such documents remain of Gertrude Robinson. Sasha splits off to evacuate the rest of the building with Elias, but is separated from him in the chaos. While in the artifact storage room, she spots a stranger standing by the recently delivered table. She tries to offer them help, but instead they attack her, while repeating the lines she said to them word for word. If that wasn't enough of a cliffhanger for you, when John tries to escape through the tunnels beneath the Institute, he comes face to face with Jane Prentice herself. 4 stars, this episode is solid. 40. Human Remains. The gang realizes the worms in Prentice have been gathering in the tunnels for months, sabotaging different parts of the archives and preparing to attack. They manage to defeat her and her worms using CO2 and fire, but while running through the tunnels, Martin finds the bullet-ridden corpse of former archivist Gertrude Robinson. Everyone seems to make it out of the archives alive. Even Sasha, who doesn't mention anything about that stranger she encountered or how they attacked her. That is Sasha though, right? Her voice actress has changed to the one who voiced the stranger in the previous episode, but none of her coworkers seem to notice anything different about her. Dang, it's almost like what happened with that woman's neighbor back in episode 3. And both events happened around the same table. I think you can tell where this is going. 2 stars. And with that, we've completed Season 1. Tune back in next Monday for the summary of Season 2. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next week.